Thank you so much, Astrid. Hello and welcome to Introduction to Voice Heraldry. I have a fun little PowerPoint presentation, and Astrid has now shared host privileges with me so I can show you my beautiful PowerPoint that I totally did not just make during Alden's class. I promise. So can everybody see the PowerPoint? And just the PowerPoint, not the actual PowerPoint software?
No, I've got software on my end.
Awesome. This is what happens when we switch computers. Your second monitor's not the screen share. All right, there we go. Now everyone should just be seeing the presentation, right? Excellent, thank you. So, introduction to vocal heraldry. I am Master Brian hUilliam. That is my contact information. I'm also on Facebook under Brian hUilliam. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me. Also, if you do have a question, feel free to unmute during the class. But let's get into it. If I can, there we go. So the goals of this class, we're going to go over some general rules and tips for vocal heraldry. But I'm also going to briefly discuss vocal heraldry as it pertains to list, cite, and court heraldry. Not in that order. We're going to go cite, list, and then court. If there's time, we're going to get a little extra, which is where a lot of the heraldic fun stuff can happen. So this is what we're going to go over in this class. So what does a herald do? According to Merriam-Webster, which is the source where we should all go for the definition of things, an official at a tournament of arms with duties including the making of announcements and the marshalling of combatants. One author has stated a herald is a messenger and maker of proclamations. And further, a little bit of the evolution of where the herald came from. They evolved from traveling minstrels and troubadours. So they started out as messengers, and then they became ambassadors. And they could actually move freely across borders. So heralds actually had an incredibly important role in period. Now in the SCA, we use them to make announcements, we use them for tournaments, but they don't do marshalling. We leave that to the marshals. So our heraldic roles in the SCA are largely equivalent to heralds in period. So those are heralds in general. Oftentimes there will be a herald in charge for cite and list heraldry. There ought to be one herald in charge. They're the ones who coordinate the heralds and act as the liaison between the person running the list minister, or the event staff. They're who they're making announcements for cite heraldry. This makes it to where there is only one point person to deal with, and that herald in charge, hick as I like to call them, will disperse it to all the heralds so that everyone can make whatever announcements or field assignments that they need. There's also a stunt herald. Alden talked about this a little bit in his court heraldry class. This mostly applies to court heraldry, but it's where you have one or more additional heralds who are helping out. They can be backup for if you have an issue, or they may be a new person who's trying to learn heraldry, so you may give them an award or two to deal with during court. I have kind of seen stunt heralds, though not necessarily called stunt heralds, in things like list heraldry or cite heraldry, where they're kind of shadows. I will generally call those heralds in training, where they're kind of shadowing a more experienced herald and learning the ropes. So it's very important. If you are a more experienced herald, take the opportunity to get a stunt herald or a little herald in training and show them the awesomeness that is vocal heraldry. If you're a newer herald, ask a more experienced herald if you can shadow them, if you can work with them to get some hands-on experience at an event. So moving on to some general rules for all heraldry, you should stay hydrated. And by this I mean water or like a sports drink. Avoid caffeine, avoid dairy, though especially in the sun. Those will be bad for you. Breathe using your diaphragm and project your voice. Do not shout. Shouting is just going to hurt your vocal cords. Projecting will be useful. I have an entire class on projection and phrasing where we go over how to breathe and how to project, but just keep those things in mind so you do not hurt yourself. As Alden said earlier, take care of your instrument. This truly is an instrument, so don't go run over your trumpet. Don't mess up your throat. Don't mess up your voice. Enunciate your words, particularly those starting and ending consonants, like start, down. The letters that begin and end words are very important to help people understand. So focus on those. Also, generally, give an introduction of some sort before you make whatever announcement you're going to make. An oyez, oyez, or pray attend, good gentles all, hear these words. Do something to tell people, wrap up your conversation, focus on me, I'm the important thing right now. Listen to the announcement. If you just start your announcement, it's going to take 4 or 5 words before people actually start paying attention. So give some kind of filler intro so that people can shift gears to pay attention to you. Also, try your best to avoid using modern phrases, but don't go overboard. When you want to move cars to the parking area, and I am guilty of this, move your vehicles to the parking area, move your cars. It is better to say, move your wagons, but don't overdo it and go the fantasy route of all dragons should be moved to the dragon's lair. Like, that's going to also break the ambiance for people. The same way as move your vehicle or move your car might break the ambiance. I've also seen fire chariot. Those are little special phrases that may be cute, but they can kind of break the ambiance. So try to avoid those if possible. So those are our general rules for heraldry and what a herald is. The next section is heraldic accessories. That's like propane and propane accessories, heraldry and heraldic accessories. So does anybody have any questions before we move on to that? Seeing none. Heraldic accessories. So as I discussed, you want to stay hydrated. Get a mug, fill it with water or a sports drink. Yay mug. Those are your best options. Avoid dairy. Dairy coats your throat, and it can make it more difficult to get the sound out, to enunciate, to pronounce things. That's a trick from my old choir days. Also avoid alcohol, not just because it gets you drunk, but because it doesn't hydrate you. Things like soda and energy and stuff with lots of caffeine, that's also going to dehydrate you, and it's a diuretic, so it's going to make you have to use the restroom. So avoid those things as much as possible. If you need your morning coffee, get your morning coffee and then switch to water. But don't walk around with, 17 sodas all day. That's not going to go well for you. Just in general for your health, too. Don't drink that much soda in one day. If you're going to be outside, you should wear a hat, preferably a wide-brimmed style hat, especially if you're like Alden. If you don't have hair covering, Alden's actually usually really good about wearing a hat, whereas I am not. And so I leave events with a sunburn a lot. Alden, not so much, because he's a smart man, and I am here. So you should also try to wear sunscreen, particularly if you're not wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Get your ears, get the back of your ears, because those are the really sensitive areas that get a lot of sun. But wear some sort of wide-brimmed hat, a felt hat, straw hat, something. Protect yourself, cover yourself. You should also have a book, particularly if you're court herald. The herald's book is an absolute necessity for court, but it can be useful for sight heralds to keep a list of announcements. If you're list heralding, you're probably going to use the list book or the list cards, so you won't necessarily need those items if you're list heralding. But if you've got your own and you can make it work, that's great. But the book is absolutely necessary for court, can be useful for site heraldry as well. Now, the Heraldic Tavern. This is something that's typically necessary for court. It's kind of the universal sign of a herald wearing the tabard of the arms for whoever they're heralding for. It's not required for list or site heraldry. It can be useful, though. One of the cool things that the Shire of Seawinds did a few years ago for Crown Tournament was they made 4 Kingdom Arms heraldic tabards and had all the heralds at each of the fields wearing a Kingdom tabard because it was Crown Tournament and they were heralding for the Crown for Crown Tournament. So it was really cool. And then the Kingdom got to keep some of the tabards. So they were really nice, high quality, lightweight linen tabards. I love them, especially at Go4 on those hot days. They're fantastic. So yay, Seawinds. Great use of tabards. Just also understand Wreath, our previous Wreath Sovereign at Arms, who's the society level herald, did issue a ruling about the use of heraldic trumpets. So if you're using the crossed trumpets, that's the herald's badge, that represents you working as an officer of the College of Heralds. So it's really not going to be appropriate when you're heralding for a particular individual or when you're heralding at court. But if you're using it for site or general list heraldry on behalf of the event, it's generally accepted. So just be really mindful of what is on the tabard you're wearing, and understand that when you wear a tabard with someone's arms, you represent that person. So watch out for what you do and what you say, because you are that person at that point. And finally, the fun part, the Heraldic Baton. It's a stick. It's a herald stick. It's great. It's a visual reference. It's not required at all, but it may be used by any heralding. The tabard itself, like I mentioned, it can be very personalized, and the baton itself may also be personalized. I know His Grace Mahadi has a baton that was made for him by Honorable Lord Ivo that has his arms on it. So if you're heralding for Mahadi, that's a great baton to use. If you're heralding for the crown or for your local nobility, that's not a great baton to use. Be really mindful. If it's a personal baton, it's not going to be good for court unless it's, for the crown or for that nobility as that nobility. If I'm heralding for the Baron and Baroness of Loch Sawyer and I've got a baton that has Baron Cragg's eels on it, that's not going to be appropriate for him while he is Baron of the Loch and acting as Baron of the Loch. I want something that has Loch stuff on it, not stuff that has personal stuff to that B&B. So if you're going to use a plain baton, or if you're going to use a baton to herald for something that's not an individual person, use a plain baton. So if you're doing royal court or baronial court or general list heraldry, probably use a plain baton. Now, if it's site heraldry or you're heralding for an individual person, use whatever baton. But think about who you're representing with that baton and who you're representing while you're heralding. Do those things, mesh together. Also, it's important to remember that the baton can be unwieldy if you're using it for court. If you're balancing the book and the baton and you're trying to go through scrolls and move stuff with a stick and a book, it gets a little awkward. The Loch itself used to have a herald's baton, and I stopped using it because I couldn't. It was, a 5-foot shaft with a giant ball on the end of it, and I had to stop using it because I couldn't balance that and the book at the same time. So when you're doing list heraldry as well, if you're using the list cards or the list books, it can be really difficult to use that baton. So just think about, is it actually practical? Oh, shifted. Sorry about that. So those are heraldic accessories. We're going to next step into the actual things. And Alden mentions batons are great for processions. Yes, and I do mention that a little bit later if we get there, if there's time for it. So we're going to move on to site heraldry. Site heraldry is where a person is making announcements for the schedule, for activities, and wake-up calls. And they can also make various announcements for the event staff, like move your wagons to the parking area. Don't leave your wagon behind the thrones for court. It's really obnoxious. So they're going to make whatever announcements are necessary for the event, from the event staff, from the nobility, from the royals, whoever's kind of in charge. This does entail walking around the event site, so be very mindful of that. Wear comfortable shoes, stay hydrated, wear your hat. Just understand that this usually entails a lot of walking and a lot of repeating the announcements. So if you are going to do a wake-up call, be gentle. Please be gentle. Don't go to where all the tents are and just start shouting, "Hey, you guys, wake up!" Actually go in there, "Oyez, oyez, my lords and ladies, good gentles all. Events are beginning. It is now 8 of the clock. Activities will start at 9. Please prepare yourselves." And you do use a softer voice and go to like tent clusters. Don't go into people's tents, but go into like tent clusters and make soft, gentle announcements. Like I said, don't go in there and just start shouting. That's going to get shoes thrown at you, if you're lucky, just shoes. Also remember, please include the time when you're making an announcement. It doesn't do much good to say, "My lords and ladies, the Bardic competition is starting at 3 p.m. and walk away, because everyone's going to then shout, "What time is it now?" Now that's going to be a little less common. People are keeping their cell phones on them more. But even 5 years ago, people wouldn't keep their cell phones directly on their person as much. So it's useful to say, the time is now 2 of the clock. 2 of the clock is one of those little cutesy turns of phrases that people will often use. But the time is now 2. The Bardic competition will begin at 3. And Alden is ragging on Toastig for some of his stuff as announcing herald. That's good. Always, if a herald is, going in and shouting at 8 o'clock in the morning instead of doing gentle wake-up calls, polite reminders of courtesy maybe in store. So that's site heraldry. If there are no questions, I'll move on to list, sometimes called field heraldry. I guess another thing I didn't mention, site heraldry is sometimes called, site heraldry is sometimes called cry heraldry. That's often what will be called like Gulf Wars. But site heraldry, cry heraldry, that's the same thing. Moving on to list or field heraldry. List, sometimes spelled with a Y instead of an I. This is the herald who is acting as the voice of the marshal and or the list minister during a tournament. Their job is to make sure everyone hears their pairings for the tournament and then call the fighters to the field for their bouts. So they will announce the pairings before the round begins. Usually they'll get the cards and say, "Oyez, oyez, fighters pray it's in the pairings." When you hear that, particularly for the armored field, give a pause, because Alden will attest to this because he's got these types of knees. But when you call fighters to attend the pairings, they're all going to walk up and you'll hear clank, 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 as their metal knee cops are hitting their cuisses and armors, smashing against itself. So people aren't going to be able to hear you unless you give a little bit of time to let that settle before you start saying it. So announce the pairings to come to the field. This tells the fighters who they're fighting, when they're fighting, and where they need to go. So if you've got multiple fields, that can be really important. So on the first field, Sir X will face Centurion Y, something like that. It also lets the spectators know what fighters are coming up. So say we're gearing up for Crown Tournament and a couple of hotshot knights or a couple of dukes who may be gunning for Crown get paired up. Maybe a lot of people want to check that out to see, is this going to be a kind of a preview for Crown Tourney? So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on list heraldry because there is some stuff that's more intricate for Ansteorra. So typically when you're calling up fighters, you're going to announce 3 fights at a time. This is so you can get people prepared. So you're going to call the first set, I have Duke A and Centurion B, take the field. The second set will be arm yourselves, and the third set will be make ready. Take the field means get on the field now. Your fight is now, let's do it. Arm yourselves means pick up your weapons, make your final adjustments, get ready, you are next. And make ready is start getting your stuff on, hats, get your helm on. They usually say hats and bats, but bats would be arm yourselves, that's your sword. Make ready, get your gear on. And this works for, either combat field. So understand that there is a meaning to what you're saying when you say take the field, arm yourselves, and make ready. Next, when the fighters have gathered, it's on the herald to call the salutes. We have 4 salutes typically in Ansteorra, 3 to 4. Really, the first one is going to be salute the crown, salute the nobility, if applicable. If it's a local baronial event, you're going to salute the nobility. If it's something like King's Champion or Queen's Champion, you're not going to salute the local nobility. Salute the one whose favor you bear, or salute the one who inspires you this day. So salute whoever you're fighting for. Make those salutes to your inspiration. And then salute your most honorable and worthy opponent. A note, some kingdoms will do salute the crowd. We don't do that in Ansteorra. I've seen it a couple of times. It's really not built into our traditions, and so a lot of fighters don't necessarily know how to react to that. It's just not something we've done, so don't worry about it. These are the 4 salutes that we do in Ansteorra. So what happens if the crown isn't present? Look to whatever noble or royal is presiding at the event. If the heirs, the prince and or princess, are available, say salute the crown in the form of their highnesses. Salute the crown in the form of her highness, something like that. If it's just a local event and there's no royal presence, you should still salute the crown. This is where you would salute the crown and salute the nobles. Fighters can salute the local nobility or their thrones on behalf of the crown. Or say if there's 2 events that weekend and you're in the northern reaches of the kingdom and they're in Steps or they're in Stargate, fighters can salute southward towards the crown. But you should still always be saluting the crown at these events. Even if it is a local championship, the locals only get to do their things because of the crown, so we salute the crown. So even if the crown's not there, salute the crown. After that first round, we generally don't do salutes until the final round or final 2 rounds. So to move things along quickly, we will often say, fighters, make what salutes you will. And this tells the fighters make their salutes and then move on with it. One of the things that I've seen done in other kingdoms is on salutes previously given, or fighters remember your salutes, and then they move on. I tried to bring this to Ansteorra, and it just didn't work. Fighters didn't know how to react, how to respond. So it doesn't work. It's supposed to mean you've already done your salutes, let's move on. But we have so drilled into our fighters that they make the salutes before every bout that they just went ahead and did the salutes anyway. So it didn't work. We move on. Once you have announced those salutes, you need to relinquish control of the field. Yield the field to the marshal. So say something like, fighters, make your salutes. Marshal, the field is yours. And this tells the marshal that they are now in charge of the field. And this comes down to that historic example of heralds historically may have also doubled as marshals. So this is the herald is fulfilling their role, and now we're shifting that over to the marshal. The marshal has their role. And if you are on the field inside the list ropes, get off the field, unless you are also actively marshaling. I don't recommend it. If you can, don't marshal in herald. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but please do remember to yield the field to the marshal. Most marshals really like that and appreciate when a herald does that. So, also you should know the tourney format. After each pass, you'll be announcing the winner. So understand, is it a single point? Is it best 2 out of 3? It's really bad to say victory to, Lady Jane when it's a best 2 out of 3 and Jane just took the first point. So don't announce your winner prematurely. No premature congratulations. Understand the tourney format. And if you do have the list cards as a list or field herald, hand the cards to the winner with the winner on top. Always winner on top. And, sometimes mistakes will happen. You'll announce the wrong fighter. Maybe you'll screw up on the best 2 out of 3. It happens. Apologize and move on. We're all human. Nobody's perfect. So just understand that it's not the end of the world. Just try to do better next time. Apologize and move on. Keep doing your job. Because worst case, you're doing the job so somebody else can play. Or maybe you're just learning. It's okay. We've all made mistakes. I've not been perfect. I've made mistakes. Alden's made mistakes. Everybody, Duncan, McGregor from Namron has made mistakes. Everybody screws up. It's okay. Just learn, move on. Speaking of moving on, we go to court heraldry. Unless there are any questions, I will pause for a drink for questions. There being none. Court heraldry, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on court heraldry because Alden just did an entire hour on that. I also have a court heraldry class. I have a couple of court heraldry classes, and I'm doing one this afternoon. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because it really is a class unto itself. But in court, the herald acts as the voice of the crown or the blowing of cornets. They will announce the nobles into court. They'll call people into attendance for the nobles. They'll read award scrolls. They'll do the vivats at the end. All of that good stuff. They are kind of the MC. So as the court herald, they're the stage manager. They're the that doesn't need to be stage comma manager. That'll get fixed later. So you're acting as the stage manager. You're the MC. You are the sound box. You are everything. Oop, I'm trying to admit somebody, and I'm sliding scrolls, or I'm sliding slides. So understand that you have a very big role in court as the court herald. You are representing the noble or the royal you're serving. And that means you also represent whatever lands they hold. So if you were heralding for the crown, you represent the crown. If you were heralding for nobility, you represent the nobility. You represent that barony. So please understand that and act accordingly. You are, at that point in time, the voice of the kingdom. You are the voice of your barony. So you need to act accordingly. Understand that is a big responsibility. That doesn't mean that if you make a mistake or you pronounce something wrong, it's the end of the world. Again, apologize, move on, and learn. But you are expected to be a professional and to keep things moving as much as possible. So that's really all I've got for court heraldry. Like I said, there was an entire class on court heraldry, and there's another class on court heraldry a little bit later. So there are other resources for court heraldry. If you do have questions on court heraldry, you're welcome to reach out to me. But now the fun part, since we do have time, and this class is probably going to end a little bit early. That's good. Everyone can go to lunch a little bit early. But now getting extra. So in Ansteorra, sometimes we'll have opportunities to get extra, as I'm calling it here as Voice Herald, where we can really step up, shine, and show off. So these are things like processions, pod arms, high persona events. That's where we can really go above and beyond. We can stand out and really, in some instances, make events for people. For crown tournament and peerage ceremonies, there's usually some sort of procession. So that's where you're heralding a person in either to court or to the tournament. And you're reading off, their awards, their accomplishments, and maybe you read their arms. This is a great opportunity to add flair. You can say, if it's someone coming in for crown tournament, how they were a tremendous fighter at Gulf Wars and single-handedly turned the tides in the Ravine battle for Ansteorra. Make it based somewhat in truth, but it's okay to exaggerate, build up on things. This is where you can really, throw some flair on there. Make it sparkle. This is where you have the most kind of leeway in making things special, going above and beyond. I'm saying get extra, really lay it on thick. If you are doing a procession, please remember it does not have to be memorized. A lot of times there's a lot of stuff that people have, and you don't need to have it memorized. Just make some notes. You don't have to script it out fully. It's up to you. But have a cheat sheet, have some notes to refer back to. If you have a book, put it in a book. It's not the best to have a white sheet of computer paper in front of you that you're reading, but I've done it. I think we've all done that. So have nicer paper, a book, a notebook that looks decent, something like that. So you're not just using white computer paper. But if that's all you got, make it work. Own it. So moving on to a pod to arms and the more high persona events, heralds can be enlisted for processions, for banters, and for crowd engagement. This is where you can, in addition to the procession, you may be on or near the field with your fighter. You can do a little trash talk. You can try to get the crowd involved and get behind your person. I do a class on heraldry for the PA, sometimes called Heraldry at the Tournament, where we talk about how you can really make even kind of a middling performance on the field look phenomenal by just declaring how wonderful your person is, how much fun they're having, how great they're doing. Or you can have a really good showing on the field look kind of mediocre because nobody's proclaiming their greatness. Nobody's talking about how everybody's doing wonderfully on the field. So this is an event particularly where it's important to remember that you are representing your patron and not yourself. So keep that in mind. I've used that to my advantage sometimes by talking a little trash and getting the other person in trouble. Particularly, I've done it as a joke. This is with permission, I think. With my Baron, I've made a comment, said something, and followed it up with, and remember, if you have any issues with what I've said today, I represent Crag von Bergen, Baron of Luxlear, and walk away and kind of leave it to Crag to deal with the aftermath. So don't do that unless you have that kind of relationship. But it can be a really fun way to do things, to add some flair to events. This is a really good time to wear a tabard. Wear a tabard of your patron's arms, or you can wear a resume tabard. A resume tabard is a fairly plain tabard with a bunch of different arms all out on it that represent people you've worked with or worked for. I have one. I have to find it, but if you want a picture of it, I can send you a picture at some point. So this would be a good time. Wear your patron's arms, wear your resume tabard. This would not be an okay time to wear those crossed trumpets. We're trying to push away from using those crossed trumpets, except for when you are acting on behalf of the college. This is also a good, not a god opportunity. I'll fix that. I'll fix that later. But a good opportunity to use a heraldic baton. You're often not going to have a script in front of you for these. At least you might for the procession, but you won't for the on-field banter type stuff. So use that baton and show people this is what pay attention. Wave the baton above your head, get people's attention, shout out, "Oyez, Centurion so and so is taking the field to do battle against the dastardly Duke such and such." Something like that. Really use it to add to the pomp and circumstance, get people interested, get people involved. General rules for the banter: interact mostly with the other herald. Don't distract the fighter from fighting, but trash talk the herald. This is where we used to have an event called Lists at Castleton, where we would do this, and I got into heraldic throwdowns with people, and it was a lot of fun. But we didn't really go over into talking to the fighters. We would talk to the heralds about the fighters. And so you'd have the fighters fighting in the background and the heralds at the kind of the barriers, and then the gallery pavilion, and the heralds are, chirping back and forth at each other as the fighters are on the field, and the gallery's watching it all. And it was a really fun day. Do not insult the other fighter, always give praise. So don't walk off the field and say, well, of course, Sir So-and-so won. Look at this lowly peasant. Of course, they beat them into the ground like a tent peg. Like, that's really trashy. Don't do it. Talk about how the other fighter put on a valiant effort, but unfortunately this day he was no match for your wonderful, amazing patron who's a great fighter, and this fighter showed promise and skill, and one day they may be able to match your wonderful patron, but today was not that day. Build up the other fighter, or talk about how, this was such a great fight and fate's shown upon my patron this day. Don't trash talk. Don't trash the other fighter. Trash talk is different from trashing. So don't insult the fighter. Keep it positive. Build up the patrons. This is something that is discussed it when I took an ancient and medieval arts class in college. Some cultures would kind of denigrate their opponents and say, oh, we easily overtook them. They're lowly and terrible. And other cultures would say, look at how amazing we are because we had this worthy opponent that we trampled. We are only so great because our opponents were great, and we proved our greatness by defeating a really good opponent, versus we just demolished a bunch of little pipsqueaks. So is it better for your fighter to have won a hard-fought fight against a worthy opponent, or is it better for them to club people like a baby harp seal? Build up your fighter by building up their opponents. Also inform the gallery and the keeper of the list, if applicable, of your fights. Sometimes there will be someone who's actually keeping score. So if that's the case, that is your job as that person's herald to keep score. This is unlike a usual SCA tournament where the fighters take back their own cards. In these types of tournaments, the herald may be responsible for reporting wins and losses. But also, keep the gallery informed. Let them know what's going on. Use that baton, draw attention to your fighter, and make the gallery look at your fighter and keep their interest. And please the gallery. Say things that are going to either excite the gallery, keep them interested, or just flat out flatter the gallery on behalf of your patron, because it's your job to make that patron look good. And so that's pretty much the class. Here are some additional resources. You can find a lot of good stuff on voice heraldry, a lot of good articles at the Heraldry website for the SCA. And the books that I cited earlier, Stefan Oliver, Introduction to Heraldry, and Heraldry Sources, Symbols and Meanings by Otfried Neubecker. Those are available on, I don't know if they're actually available on Google right now. I had some older copies, but you can usually find those at a lot of libraries, like a lot of public libraries. So if you're interested in reading up more on those, I think I may have copies of these. So if you're interested in seeing those, let me know. But that is it for me. We've got about 10 more minutes. If there are any questions, you can ask now. You can follow up with an email later or Facebook, or visit my website, masterdonbrian.wordpress.com, and see I've got some of my heraldry stuff already on my website. Some of it I may be adding a little bit later. But thanks everybody for coming. I hope you got something out of this. I see, oops. Let's go back. I see Jessamine has raised her hand. Jessamine, did you have a question?
Sort of a question statement. I tend to do that. On tabards, it seems to me that a baldric could also be used in place of a tabard.
Practically, perhaps. Historically, not really.
Okay.
That I have seen, and there could be manuscripts out there I haven't looked. There are manuscripts out there I haven't looked at. I haven't looked at all of them, but mostly what I see for heralds in the SCA's time period, generally speaking, and all of my research has been Europe. So if it's extra European, I don't know. But all that I've seen are tabards of various shapes and sizes, mantles, and occasionally a hood. I have not seen a baldric used um,
Okay.
to represent a person. Now, in the SCA, we've had people wear like the green baldricks with the cross trumpets on it. Is that more what you're talking about?
Yeah, that I was thinking of that one. Less material, literally just the cost of making one is a smaller, reduced cost. And
Mhm.
in the heat, extra layers, there's less to the layer when it's a baldric as opposed to a full tabard, just for ventilation. I was thinking that might be easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we used to see those a little more common than we do today, but people definitely, we used to have some. They were green baldricks with the crossed trumpets. Again, those are, the crossed trumpets should really only be used when you're representing the college or some sort of heraldic office. Like if you, and it's been allowed for like site heraldry or list heraldry. So if you're using it for that purpose, it's perfectly fine. It's also okay when doing site or list heraldry to go tabard lists, especially on hot days. My suggestion for tabards, generally speaking, is make them out of linen if you can. Um, my resume tabard is one layer of linen. Uh, I think the last tabard I made was some sort of cotton blend, uh, and it's all black, so I don't wear it that much if I can help it. But that was for Modius, and he's all black and white. Um, but yeah, so wear what's going to make you comfortable. If you're not comfortable in a big tabard, maybe don't make it out of silk, even though silk and velvet would be period things to make the tabard out of. Don't do that. This is Ansteorra. If you're in the East Kingdom or if you're in Antir, Eldermere, or something like that, you can get away with wearing that kind of tabard. You generally can't do that in Ansteorra. So use linen because linen's going to breathe a lot better. But if you are working as a herald on behalf of the college, or if you're doing site or list heraldry, sure, you can use the baldric with the crossed trumpets. One of the things that I saw from pursuivants, which are kind of the step below a herald, so they're kind of like heralds in training. They're not quite full heralds. I saw they wore hoods or mantles and had their patrons' arms kind of appliqued or painted, I think it was appliqued, onto the hood uh, to show that they were part of their retinue and they were with the heralds. So you could do, like I said, a hood or a mantle with an escutcheon, a shield shape of your patron's arms if it is too hot to wear a full tabard, and that would be period. I'm trying to see the chat. Oh, that's not good. Oh, yeah, we can go ahead and stop the screen share. So, sorry, is that Merrill says, in Ontario, you can't get away with silk or velvet outdoors here either. Yeah, and I'm assuming because your winters are so winter that you usually have indoor events in the winter, and so outdoor events in the summer, and I know it can get pretty hot up there, particularly the humidity if you're on the coastal areas like I'm on the southern coast of Ansteorra. So yeah, it's definitely smart to think about how you can. I'm casting a shadow on myself. Sweet. It's smart to think about how you can survive by looking the part of a herald. So Jessamine, the baldric is okay in the right context. I would not use it if I was heralding for an individual. I might, if I'm worried about it being too hot, I would just, like I said, do the mantle or the hood with the escutcheon of their arms on it. I would not wear a baldric if I was heralding for an individual, especially not with the herald's cross trumpets. But what I've done is I've kind of incorporated that tabard into my layer count for the day. So, I'm wearing a linen tunic and I'm going to wear the tabard, and that's what I'm wearing. I'll wear pants, but,
Thank you.
I mean, I'm not, I could go Roman and wear like bicycle shorts under my tunica, but I will incorporate that tabard when I'm considering my layer count for that day's activities. So wearing a cotton linen tunic that I would normally wear an undertunic under. I won't wear the undertunic if I'm going to have to wear a tabard, and it's Ansteorra Summer Crown Tournament. I've done that, and then I've had to change the tunic later because it's hot and I'm a big guy and I sweat. So changes of clothes in the Ansteorran summer are a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really good question. Because we have not seen those baldricks for a while, we've kind of gotten away from them. So it could be interesting if those do come out. That's kind of like heralds on duty or list heralds, something like that. That's something we can talk to Elena about as Star, if she's interested in kind of pursuing that aspect of it. I know we were talking about maybe belt favors, but those are all things coming down the road, early plans of things. So we are about out of time. If there are no questions, we can let everybody get to lunch a little bit early. Or does somebody want to be the teacher you forgot to assign as homework person? If there is nothing, everyone, thank you so much for attending. Like I said, I hope you got something out of this class. If you do have any follow-ups, feel free to email me, find me on Facebook, or yell at me at an event when we're allowed to have them at some point in time in the future. Maybe. But thank you, Astrid. Thank you so much for moderating. And everyone, enjoy your lunch and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Also, if you haven't been on the event page, we do have a virtual gate, so please troll through and let us know where you're visiting us from. I'm going to stop the recording now, and everybody have a great lunch.